good evening to everybody. I think in India it's 8:30. In Singapore it's actually 11 in the evening, so this is quite late for me, right? And I'm going to be doing a 1 hour crash course. So because it's a 1 hour crash course, there really isn't much time at all. And because there isn't much time at all, you would expect that I'll be going through some of the basics of threat modeling quite quickly, right? And the outcome for today is not so much to make you a master, but rather to make you think about some of the key concepts and key principles behind threat modeling so that you can ask better questions, you can do more research yourself, you can, I guess, also appreciate what some of the other practitioners in the field mean when they say they do threat modeling. Okay. So, in case you don't already know me, I am not sure, right? I work in TELUS, that's my day job. I lead cyber functions for Singapore's digital factory projects. This department has actually merged into another department called the Critical Information Systems Department, right? But that is an internal business line thing, so I guess I won't bore you with the details, right? I also co-lead the Threat Modeling Connect chapter in Singapore, and I think many more of you will know this fact that I also sit on the advisory board of Vulncon. I've been doing this for, I think, about 3 years so far. Okay, so I've spoken in quite a number of places. So I guess if you really want to know what I do, you can just screenshot this slide, and then we will quickly move on, right? Okay. So what are we going to do today? Okay, so we are going to basically explain what threat modeling is. We will go into some of the... you cannot hear. Okay, I'm testing. Can you hear me? Oh, now you can hear me. Just now you couldn't. Okay, then I guess I have to repeat quite a bit of my stuff. Let me do that. I see somebody is typing. Is it? Am I? Do I repeat or what? Oh no. Oh, okay, okay, got it, okay. Yeah, so I was saying, we will also go into data flow diagrams. We will also use a very simple threat modeling framework called Stride, okay? And then we will have a bit of time to talk about, to do some activities. I will be showing a demo. You have some chance to be able to play, to also follow with a tool called OWASP Precogly, and I'll also have some time for final remarks. All right, so basically, what is threat modeling, okay? What I like to do is to explain what threat modeling is, why we do this, introduce some of the vocabulary associated with this, and then talk about the threat modeling manifesto, right? And what some of these best practices are. Okay. So threat modeling, there are many ways to look at it, but I thought I would quickly get everybody started with a definition for OWASP. So think of a threat model as a structured representation of all the information that affects the security of an application or a system, really. What does this actually mean? This means that really what we are doing is that we want to understand in a system or an application what could possibly go wrong, right? And there are many things that can go wrong, as you probably know, right? You probably know this because in your bug bounty programs, you try to find, say, weaknesses in web applications. You try to exploit certain vulnerabilities, right? If you do infrastructure pen tests, you also find ways to say move from one part of the system to another part of the system as part of lateral movement in infrastructure. But actually, if you think about this topic of threat modeling, we do this all the time, right? We do this because we decide the strength of the lock that we use when we want to secure the home. I am not sure about you guys, but I don't think anybody here uses a bulletproof door for their house, even though it's more secure than, say, a gate, right? If you use a bulletproof door, then just post in the chat that you use a bulletproof door, okay? So that you can prove me wrong. But the point here is that you probably would have done some assessment. You conclude that based on the assessment that you do, you identify what can possibly go wrong in your home, like someone trying to burgle it, and then you decide, okay, you probably will just buy a lock for your gate, right? Maybe if you have more assets at home, then you think of better defenses, right? Like maybe hiring a mercenary to stand guard outside your house, but most people don't do that, right? You also decide whether it's safe to go out at night, and this one I always find it a very funny topic, because when I do these classes in Singapore, then people say, no, there's nothing wrong when you go out at night. You can go out at 2 a.m. at night and jog, and there's no problem. But if you try to do this class in, say, the US, then let's just say that nobody believes you when you say it's safe to go out at 2 a.m., right? So in other words, what you have done is basically to model what can possibly go wrong if you go out of the house at 2 a.m. in the morning, and then based on the overall security picture that you see in the country, you conclude whether or not it's safe, right? Then of course, for those of you who are dating, you also try to figure out whether or not a certain date has red flags. And what we mean by that, okay, by the way, I think my screen turned a bit yellow. Let me turn off a filter, and then I will come back to it. Okay, good. Yes. So what I mean when you say that, okay, you assess whether a date has some red flags, because things can go very wrong, right? Perhaps you are going on online date, that you see a profile, and then you realize that, hey, this person is not what they seem to be. Okay. And why we do this? Why we do this is because it's probably way cheaper to try to correct a system when it's still in its design phase, as opposed to trying to correct it after or during the penetration test, right? And I guess if you look at it from the perspective of cost, then you do things that are minimally invasive. And if you can find what can go wrong in the system quicker, then you perhaps save a lot more money try to fix things in the design phase. Okay, so that also goes to the next point, that we look at things from a secure by design perspective, as opposed to trying to come up with security measures by bolting them onto the system. And I think all in all, we threat model also because I think there's a positive side effect to the groups that we work with, to the various development teams, to the infrastructure teams, that basically everybody is just more aware that there are security implications and security activities that can be done throughout the life cycle of a project. So that's why we threat model. Okay, so the next slide is probably one of my less interesting slides, but I think this is important because we need to define some vocabulary. Okay, so a threat event. So think of a threat event as an example, right? Say, for example, we order food delivery. In India, I'm sure you use Zomato, right? So normally most food delivery guys are trusted, but imagine that maybe this food delivery guy, perhaps he has a very really bad day, and this guy wants to earn a quick buck from you, unfortunately, right? So maybe this guy tries to bypass the door to steal classified documents. Like for example, maybe you order Zomato in the office, and this guy notices that there's some documents that are on the table, right? So he may try to steal them while performing food delivery. So that's an example of a threat event, right? So an example of a vulnerability is that there may be lack of authentication controls. For example, perhaps the office door is very, very wide open, and because the office door is very, very wide open, basically any user can come through the office door, right? Why this is important is because there can be many different threat events, but if there's no vulnerability to exploit, then there's no risk. For example, there can be a threat event of, say, a nuclear bomb falling over a part of India. But if there is really no good reason to drop one, then the likelihood of the risk factor actually actualizing is almost zero, right? I mentioned the word risk. So if there's a threat event and there's a vulnerability that can be exploited by the threat event, then you have something called risk. And then you try to deal with it by coming up with certain mitigation controls, and you eventually have a residual risk. That means what's left. So in the case of this example that we have here, like for example, if you have classified documents, the door is wide open, the chances of them being stolen can be quite high because it can be very easily accessible. Like for example, they being on the front desk, right? And then you try to implement some mitigations, like for example, installing a door lock where only employees know the passcode. So in most offices, you do this kind of thing, and then you lower the likelihood of classified documents being stolen. Okay, so this is the not so interesting part. And if we try to put all these together, you can see that these definitions are linked in this chain of, I would say, activities. A threat source initiates a threat event, right, to exploit a vulnerability to cause a certain risk item, and risk is a function of impact and likelihood. Okay, you try to mitigate these risks with concerted security controls, and this is always a cycle whereby you try to implement some security, you lower the risk. If it's not low enough, you implement more security control. Okay, so I hope everybody gets this. Okay, so next, now that I've got some definitions out of the way, I thought I'll now actually jump straight into threat modeling, right? And perhaps the most fundamental way to look at it is to think about this, okay, from a four-question framework. And so what are these four questions? So one way to think about this, okay, so we think of this from four very, very basic questions, okay? The first question, what are we working on? Meaning, what's the scope, right? Because you don't want to scope the whole world and do threat modeling for the whole world, because as much as we like to do the activity, we don't have enough time and we don't have enough energy to do this, right? So we need to scope, we need to know what's relevant. And second, what can go wrong? This is always the most exciting part. People like to poke hole in systems. I'm no exception. So we use threat modeling frameworks to enumerate threats, right? And there are many, many different things that can go wrong. So this is where threat modelers have lots of fun. Okay. Then next, what are we going to do about it? Just because you find lots of loopholes means nothing, because if you do nothing about them, then all you have done is to make everybody look quite bad. If you look at this from the perspective of a bug bounty, then yeah, we report the vulnerabilities, and that's very great. But what are you going to do about it? Because if you don't do anything about the vulnerabilities, then someone else can very well exploit them as well. So that's not good, and we want to fix these, right? So that's why the third question is very important. And the last question of whether you do a good enough job is very important, because if you look at security, right, if you talk about mitigations, there are many different kinds of mitigations that you can introduce, right, in a threat model. But then sometimes they are overkill, sometimes they are not enough. So we need to know whether we do a good enough job. Like for example, in the case of the example of your house that I mentioned way earlier, right? You could install a bulletproof door, and chances are it's really wonderful, right? But perhaps it's too expensive. Uh, and if you decide that maybe a lock for your gate is good enough, then yeah, maybe we did a good enough job. Okay, I think we see a real IT problem in the chat, so someone can pay attention to that one and see if you can help me sort that out as I continue. Okay, so some threat modeling best practices. Okay, the first best practice we have is that we want to start this very, very early, right? And why you do this, the earlier you start, the earlier you can fix issues, right? You can try to influence the design of a solution. And if you can influence the design of a solution, it's often easier to do that than to wait till a design has been committed, and you know probably how painful it is to tell people to change a design where perhaps you've already bought something, or perhaps the developers have already committed to started building parts of the solution. Okay, and of course we try to work as a team. The reason for this is quite simple. As much as we are security guys and we like to say we're very good, the odds of us being good at everything is pretty much zero. That means to say, for example, in the team, we have people who are application experts, you have people who are database experts, you have folks that do infrastructure, etc. And different teammates come in with different skills. And with their different skills, right, they are able to contribute to the threat model. In other words, threat modeling is actually group work. And I think also one very important principle is that we always want to identify assets as thoroughly as possible. Meaning to say, often in a threat modeling exercise, what we do is we run workshops with teams, right? And with these teams, what happens is that we discuss, we ask lots of questions. We ask questions about how the architecture is like. We move into some level of depth of the architecture. We ask questions about the data flows. We want to understand the capabilities of the system. And the reason why we sometimes sound very, very irritating when you do this exercise is because we really want to understand how things work. And it's only when you understand how things work that you are then able to understand where things can go wrong. Okay. And the next best practice, though I guess in today's class we don't really have that much time, so we will not do the full extent of this, right, is that we sometimes use different models and different approaches to identify threats and mitigations. The reason for this is because one threat model may not tell us the full picture. To give you some context, for example, Strike, very easy to learn, very easy to pick up, and you can find resources on Strike everywhere. The trouble is that Strike doesn't really tell you how things can go wrong. So if you look at Strike, okay, you realize that in Strike, it tells you about the cybersecurity properties that can go wrong, but it doesn't tell you how the attacker would actually exploit vulnerabilities to result in those vulnerabilities being exploited. So that's where you come in from the perspective of using other frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK, MITRE KPAC, etc. And this is where pen testers will come in and show all their fancy techniques. It's also important to know that with every human, there's always bias. And with bias, there always is the risk that we don't do a good enough job in terms of covering the threat landscape of a system. So I thought one good book to read, but the book is quite long, to understand what we mean by biases is actually a declassified text by the CIA where they look into the psychology of intelligence analysis. And actually, what this book is about looking through some of the intelligence failings that have happened, the biases that intelligence agents have when they think about problems. And when they think about problems, because of these biases, what consequences result. And this is quite important, I think, not just from the perspective of cybersecurity. It's also important when we think about solving problems, because whenever we look at problems, we sometimes run the risk of various biases like tunnel vision, or assuming that every problem is the way we think of it because we happen to solve problems most effectively through that framework. There's a little saying that we like to say, which is not a good thing to do, but in some cases, there are people who like to think of having a very powerful hammer. And when they have a very powerful hammer, they like to think of every problem as a nail. But when you get into that mode of thinking, some weaknesses emerge. Like, for example, if the problem doesn't turn out to be a nail but a screw, then you are in some trouble because you're not going to be putting a screw in with a hammer, right? You need a screwdriver. Okay, so enough ranting about the first chapter. Let's actually move on to some more exciting stuff. Why you even come here in the first place, right? A data flow diagram, strike, and introduction to risk. So we want to build our first threat model. Okay, and in building these, we draw diagrams. Why we draw diagrams? Diagrams are very important because they help us visualize. We want to understand how a system works. We want to understand who the users are. We want to understand how the data flows, etc. And we want to draw these diagrams, right? In 1 hour, I won't be able to tell you all the case studies about how difficult it is to actually get people to draw this, okay? But just bear with me when I explain what a data flow diagram is. Okay. The concept of a data flow diagram is actually not very new. If you were to dig through the literature of this, the concept of a data flow diagram is actually about nearly as old as Singapore. This was actually introduced by somebody called Larry Constantine in 1967. And at that time, what we're really trying to say is that for any system, we are able to decompose it into four very, very basic elements. And these are the four basic elements. You are able to decompose anything into a process, into a data flow, into a data store, or an external entity. Okay. So these are basically the four elements that we look at. And then the four elements themselves basically can be used to describe any kind of abstraction of a system, right? Like, for example, if we say we talk about a three-tier web architecture, which is something that I'll be showing you as a simple example later, you can see that you can decompose some of these into various processes. You can decompose certain data stores because you need to be able to store data somewhere, somehow, right? And then you need to connect these things with data flows, and that there are external entities like humans that interact with the system. So you basically can describe those, I would say, parts of the system with a DFD. And you can do this at different levels of abstraction. Okay. But something also quite important to talk about, and arguably, I would say this is a bit controversial, is a topic of trust boundaries. And trust boundaries are important because they help you define what you believe is more important in the system. But this topic of trust boundaries has become quite tricky of late because in the past where you could design things on premise, it's fairly clear how you define these trust boundaries, right? You can define a lower trusted zone, you can define a higher trusted zone, and between these different levels of trust, you can incorporate certain defenses. Then cloud came to the forefront, and when cloud came to the forefront, you see that we run like certain microservices. You can run certain services. You can have serverless architecture, right? And then you basically use various controls in cloud environments like security groups to control access. And then the trust boundary becomes harder to draw in such a diagram, but you know there are trust boundaries because you can define them, right? I won't be talking too much about AI systems today, but AI systems introduce a new challenge because then if you talk about multi-agent systems, right, you start thinking about, oh, the permission model of these agents. Why this is important is because some agents are trusted, some agents are not so trusted. So how do you enforce a certain trust relationship across these different agent teams? This is actually an architecture problem in and of itself, which I won't go through today. Okay, so an example, DFD and trust boundaries, because I only have 1 hour, so I've decided that I will draw this very, very simply, right? And so I thought I just do a very simple exercise, fastest finger first, post the answers in the chat, right? So let's assume that this is an e-commerce web application. You have web clients, they interact with your front end, right? There's some database and there's some DB admin processes that the database admin can use, right? We assume that these guys are very dutiful. They keep logs of the application and it gets passed to a log analysis server. There's also a data store for the data that application holds, as well as another data store for management related functions, like for example, storing details of the users that use the application, etc. So fastest fingers first, tell me, what do you think is most important to secure? And yes, please post in the chat, and I would also like you to quickly explain why you believe it's most important. Okay, so we just give everybody half a minute. Okay, database. Okay, the process or the data stores that you see. Okay, half a minute goes quite fast. I see only one response so far, so I just need to check if everybody is still with us. Okay, well, this is scary. I don't know how many people I'm speaking to now. Okay, usually when we do webcasts, the trouble is that we really don't know how many people are responsive, and that's quite scary sometimes. Okay. Oh dear, and somebody just dropped. Okay, bad news. Okay, anyway, to Shubro, okay, that's a good try. And I think if you look at it from an e-commerce web application, then yes, data is very, very important. The data store in particular is important because of a few reasons. Why? One, we may be hosting personal information. We may be hosting information that is sensitive about the users. Like for example, if you happen to be running an e-commerce store whereby you are selling drugs, okay, legal drugs, right? You may ask for allergies, and that means that could be personal health information. Okay, if you're running an e-commerce page, chances are pretty good you would have to deal with transactions. Okay, so if you deal with transactions that involves money or credits, then you need to start thinking about how you're going to secure these systems. So if they involve credit card transactions, do you use a third-party gateway? Or do you actually handle it in-house? So all these are questions that emerge, right? And these questions, if you realize, based on the answers to these questions, you realize that this data flow diagram may not even be complete, right? So that's why I mentioned in the earlier part, when we do the threat modeling exercise, a lot of the time is spent actually asking the users, asking the various teams what's going on with the system they're trying to develop. Okay, so that's an example of a data flow diagram. So hope that's clear to everybody. So now let me just jump to the next piece, which is actually doing a threat model. Okay, so there is a threat modeling framework called Stride. Then later on, what happened was that there was a certain extra part called lateral movement that was added, which is called Stride LM. So the history behind this was that Stride was actually a threat modeling frame methodology that was developed in Microsoft. And that's also the reason why if you actually search up Stride, you will see many, many, many references to Microsoft doing this. Uh, if you ask me today, Microsoft has actually moved on a bit from Strike, but if you look at some of the guidance that they give to other people outside of Microsoft, when it comes to threat modeling of systems, they still use Strike as a basis. And why Strike is very popular is because it is very basic. Very basic in the sense is that easy, right? And I can do this in 1 hour. Um, and then later on, what happened was that because systems became more networked, in other words, that people normally just didn't deploy one application and that's it. People deploy network applications, network systems. And so the issue that somebody can laterally move from one system to another became a very big issue, a very big risk to deal with. And so Lockheed Martin, that's the defense contractor, they added the seventh classification called LM, which is called lateral movement. And so the entire framework, the full framework is actually called Tri-LM. Not everybody uses this, just to let you know, but I thought I introduced this because Stride LM, in my view, the LM part is actually quite important because when a system gets compromised, it's actually quite important to determine the extent to which an attacker can continue to laterally move. This relates to a concept of what we call blast radius. Okay, so what exactly are the cybersecurity properties we're talking about? Okay, so you probably know about the CIA triad, right? CIA stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In a, I would say, in the cybersecurity world, of course, some people like to joke it refers to the Central Intelligence Agency. Okay, but that aside, we can actually extend this to include some of the other kinds of cybersecurity properties. So the main point I would like to bring up here is that a spoofing threat can endanger, say, for example, authenticity property. So I just give an example, right? So a spoofing threat, like for example, if the delivery rider, as I mentioned, pretends to be a legitimate employee, like for example, because the say the delivery rider manages to steal a company badge that is on the desk or on the front desk, right? So basically, the delivery rider is able to pretend to be somebody, right, an employee of the company, and in that, you basically compromise the authenticity property, right? Then let's just give you another example before we move on, right? Let's just say, for example, the same delivery rider, right? The same delivery rider basically makes use of their pass, right, that they have stolen, right? And they basically what they do is that they steal the classified documents that I mentioned that was on the front desk, right? So there's some information disclosure. Because of that, basically it fulfills their property of a loss of confidentiality because somebody basically obtains information that they're not authorized to access. So I think this is quite simple to understand. It would be, I think, if you can actually look at the Stride LM table and you should be able to infer this from the table quite easily. Okay, so I will just jump to the next slide. So then the next question goes, okay, how do I describe these threats, right? And why it's important to describe them is because you want to be able to explain to stakeholders why this is so important, right? Because you can go to the previous slide and you can say, oh, there is a vulnerability here that the door is wide open so people can spoof the delivery rider. Okay, so what's the significance, right? What can the delivery rider do, right? Oh, the delivery rider can actually say, for example, steal a badge, right? And where is the badge located? Why is it important? Because, well, if the badge is located at the front desk, that's a very different story compared to the badge being located, say, being worn around the receptionist's neck, right? Versus say the pass being actually unfortunately being left in the toilet, right? So these are all different whereabouts, and because of the different whereabouts, the extent to which the vulnerability can actually be exploited differs significantly, right? So that's why I mentioned that the useful format for this would be that we identify who we want to understand what they do. Um, We want to understand where it's being done and how the attacker tries to exploit the system. Okay, so try your best to keep to this framework. Okay, I'm now very worried that there are quite a number of people who are saying that I'm not speaking. So you probably have to maybe adjust your audio or something. Okay, so example of this you can okay, so example of this, you can say a malicious contractor tries to install malware on an admin PC through an unsanitized USB device. Okay, so that's that, right? Okay, so next. So if you recall the threat modeling manifesto, remember we have 4 questions. And so we were talking about the first 2 questions in brief just now, right? And then we also need to look at the next 2 questions, okay? And why this is important? This is important because, well, we need to understand how we're going to deal with the threats that have been identified, right? So, the threats, as I recall, if a threat event has been identified that can exploit a vulnerability, then we have a risk item, okay? And if we have a risk item that we need to deal with, then we need to treat them, okay? And in so doing, we have 4 main methods of treating risks, okay? Mainly, we mitigate them. We can choose to eliminate them, we can choose to transfer them, or we can choose to accept them, okay? Primarily, mitigation is most important because you see that it is important to find ways to reduce the risk that a system has. And so that's where we introduce certain security controls or we incorporate certain design features to try to reduce these risks, right? Elimination sometimes occurs because we may be able to find a way to change the design to remove the risk item entirely. This doesn't always happen, but if this happens, then okay, fine, right? A risk transfer. So sometimes I don't want to take responsibility for the whole thing, so I decide that I will shift the responsibility. So this one is an example of this is buying cyber insurance. Cyber insurance used to be a popular topic some years ago because there were many insurance companies that were going out there trying to cover for cyber breaches. Now, very interestingly, what happened is that I think they completely underestimated how many people claim that they were victims of a cyber breach because these kept going up. And so after that, what happened is that these insurance companies actually became, funny enough, some of the bigger hirers for forensics capability, for forensics personnel. Why they were hiring forensics personnel was because they wanted to then do forensics, okay, on their clients to see if they were exercising due care in making sure that their system would not be breached. So in that sense, they are hiring forensics guys to check on people's systems, not to help them restore their system, okay, but rather to find evidence to not pay them money. Okay, so cyber insurance today is now a hot topic from the perspective that we really are struggling to figure out actually how much due care is considered enough, and what does it mean when we say for example, the insurance company actually covers for cyber risk. Why? I have some friends in the Middle East, and because of the Middle East war right now, well, the insurance company say this is an act of war. This is an act of war. We can't cover this because it's in the contract that we don't cover such acts. So yes, so when you talk about risk transfer, it's a very tricky topic. Okay, so this is just some general knowledge for everybody. And then risk acceptance. Well, if you think that the risk is not enough, you can also accept this, right? The organization can decide that to accept the risk. This is usually also where the CISO sometimes gets briefed because sometimes the organizations accept risks that they don't really understand. Okay. But what's good enough is actually quite difficult, and I tell you why it's quite difficult. Okay, because if you think about the trust boundary example I mentioned just now, right? You think about a more trusted zone and a less trusted zone. Okay. How do you decide what's good enough, right? So we have more trusted application, we have a less trusted application, and we have 4 different options here, okay? So I just want to have a very, very quick survey, okay? All of you can pick one option, right? Let's assume that this is a military system whereby we say have a less trusted region, whereby maybe say it contains logging of a weapon system, okay? Logging of a weapon system. And then we have a dotted line that denotes the trust boundary to a more trusted application. And the more trusted application in this case is a remote firing weapon system. Okay, let's assume you can control drones from this. Okay, from a central command, right? A C2. Okay, so in the next 30 seconds, tell me what you will put in between these two systems. Okay, so 30 seconds, just pick A, B, C, or D. Quick survey. Yeah. Oh dear, where is the chat? Um. Oh dear. I will just give another 10 more seconds. Okay. Okay. 10 seconds is clearly up. Uh, I guess we don't have too many folks actually still listening in, which is quite sad. But let's explain this, okay? I know you guys pick C because the system sounds very, very tricky to secure, and it's actually quite important in this case. I've actually worked in defense before. So it is indeed true. It is indeed true that in these kind of systems that they try to set up what we call a demilitarized zone, separate segment, whose one job is to make sure that traffic between the two regions is controlled properly. Okay, you probably also know how expensive a DMZ actually is, which is also the same reason why if I change the scenario to say that, okay, it's a less trusted application could be a public facing e-commerce page, as I mentioned, and the more trusted application could be the internal analytics a company runs to run algorithms to target their consumers. Last I checked, if you're a startup e-commerce company, you will not buy a DMZ because if you created a DMZ like this, you will go bankrupt. You go bankrupt, there is no business, there's nothing for the security guy to do. Okay. So basically, the long story cut short is that how much you decide to mitigate, right? It's really dependent on your risk. It's really dependent on the kind of system you have to secure, and actually, very much dependent on how much money and how much resource you even have, right? Because if you don't have much resource, then there is nothing much you can do beyond just using some simple open source solutions to try to secure things, right? So that's just a short brief on risk. Okay, so next chapter, okay, we are going to be doing a bit of hands-on exercise with OWASP Precogly. So what I'm going to be doing, right? Because in some sense, this is a bit of a kind of a monologue, unfortunately, because I see from the chat so few people respond, so I'm a bit sad now. So that means I guess what I will do is a bit of a kind of a bit of a lecture-like mode that we'll be doing. Okay, but it's okay. We will do this together. Okay. So OWASP Precogly, this is actually the very, very first time I'm demonstrating my threat modeling classes with this. In the past, I used to use OWASP Threat Dragon. Two reasons why. One reason is because OWASP Precogly has actually a more modern interface, okay, which I will actually run through with you guys later once I get out of the slide mode, okay. And two, actually OWASP Precogly was actually designed by one of the guys who presented at Vulncon earlier this year. Okay, his name is Vikram. Not sure how many of you actually managed to attend his demo, whereby he was showing almost precogly. And perhaps to add on, he also presented this in quite a number of conferences outside India. Vikram was in Vienna. He was presenting it at the OWASP EU Exec Days. He also presented it at Vulncon. He also presented it in. He also presented some topics on threat modeling at Black Hat and DEFCON. So a very brilliant guy. I had the fortune of having a dinner with him where we discussed quite a lot of different topics in the threat modeling scene. Okay, so let's get out of the slide mode because what we really want to do is to actually interact with the application. Okay, so once you can see my screen on the browser, right? So Precogly basically is open source. You can access it. So you can just go to the site that has been shared, right? And you can follow along what I do. Okay. So Precogly is very, very, very lightweight. Okay, you can self-host this with Docker. I won't be going through the Docker setup today because it takes some time to set it up, right? I only have an hour. So what I'm going to do is to basically do the live demo version. So I'm just going to click on live demo. So it opens a new tab, shows you this, and you can start to try the editor without any sign up. So basically, I guess you can just do this within a few seconds. So you can basically start, right? So as we go along, right, you can see that there are some concepts that we talked about, right? So we talked about process, we talk about data store. We also talk about the different kinds of external entities. In this case, the way it's been defined here is the human actor and the system actor. And I think this is very likely because nowadays, there are many so-called external actors that could either be a third party, like for example, we integrate with a third party, or that we are getting some AI to do something, okay? So I'm just going to quickly show you stuff before the screen is not stuck because I didn't put anything on there yet. Okay, so I was about to put something there. So it's just a quick drag and drop thing, right? So for example, I can drag a process, okay? And I can name it process. I can name it, say for example, application logic, right? And then I can drag a data store and I can say application data just to say this, and I can link it up with the data flows. One slight flaw with Precogly right now, which is something that I'll feedback to Vikram, is that when you define the data flows, there is one-way data flow. If you want to draw it two-way, you'll notice that you have to draw it back, but then you realize you find it sometimes quite hard to see the arrow. But that's fine for now because you can actually change the view, you can actually show some cool stuff with these. So with every element that I have on the diagram, right? You can see that maybe I'll just zoom in for you guys. I can actually edit some properties and description. So usually in the interview process, I will be taking note, for example, you have a certain process here because why maybe you have you can say, actually there is a front end. Okay, so we can say we draw a front end. So there is a front end that calls an application logic. Okay, so we know that it calls application logic, say, okay, with what protocol? So, okay, you say it calls HTTPS, fine. So that means there's some encryption in transit and stuff like that, right? And okay, we said that there was a human actor that did this. So I just draw a human actor. So you see, usually in a workshop, what happens is that we populate a DFD by asking questions and we try to enumerate as best as we can what we are trying to do. Okay. So here we say, here for example, if you can say access web page, it's by HTTPS, so on and so forth, encryption in transit, and you get the idea. So application logic, say for example, we want to write something to a database. So, okay, so that's why you see I mentioned that's one of the flaws because you can't really tell which arrow belongs to what. So let's just remove one arrow from now and let's just draw the arrow like this. Okay, so let's just say I say write to DB. Okay, right? And then here I have I can define certain kinds of data classification, so on and so forth, and I can define the protocol which I use. Clearly, as you can see, right now because this project is still in beta, there are some protocols that are not quite there yet. But as far as open source tools goes, I think this is one of the friendlier ones that you can see. Why I say this is one of the friendlier ones? In the past, when I used to teach OWASP Thread Dragon is also quite easy to set up, but the UI doesn't look as easy to use. It looked a bit dated. That's one reason. And second, for the lack of a better word, I think also my screen is stuck. Is it stuck? I drew some stuff. Oh no, I drew some stuff. I draw one more item just to see. Yes, is it? Is it okay? I drew a red rectangle. Can you see me draw one? Okay, now everybody types. Okay. Let me just carry on talking a little bit. Okay. Right. So as I said, right. So one reason why I felt that Precogly was a better tool to teach also is I'll show you some of its capabilities later on. Yes, people, you are supposed to see the Precogly screen. That is correct. Right. Okay. So what was I saying? Yeah. So you can say can I stop and start the screen share again? Okay, I will do that. Okay. Mm, yeah. Sometimes I'm a bit frightened of this. Okay. Yeah. Okay, I have reshared the screen. So I hope it is an improvement for people. I will just do some activities here where I try to draw a trust zone, maybe because some part of this application happens to be defined as a more trusted zone. So we just call this more trusted zone. We define a trust level. So you can see we can define trust boundaries here. Okay. So here is just demonstrating you some of the capabilities that there are. There are two main ways we draw this in terms of the representation. DFD or Jordan. DFD3 looks like this. Doesn't really matter. It is just a matter of cosmetic preference to me. Okay. So hopefully all that is good just to show you some of the very, very basic features. So if that's good, then let's talk a bit about, okay, say, I would like to actually save this figure. So how now, right? So what kind of format? So you can actually save this as a Cyclone DX file. So not sure how many of you are familiar with the Cyclone DX standards by OWASP. Basically, they have defined lots of different standards whereby they relate to various things in the application security. So you have CycloneDX format for like writing S-bombs. You also have it in Precogly so that you are actually able to then export this as a nice JSON to then be imported into another instance of Precogly. My understanding is that as I was speaking to Vikram, that they also plan to introduce cross platform compatibilities because one of the complaints that we received was that people just were not comfortable with the fact that OWASP actually has three different threat modeling projects. Not sure how many of you knew that. So you can check. You can try to guess in the chat what the third one is. I told you the second one already, which is called Threat Dragon. So if anybody knows the third one, you can paste it in the chat as I continue to speak. So yeah, so all of these, I would say these issues result maybe because the developers of each of the individual projects are a bit are different. And they were designed at the different point in time, so this issue results. Okay, so let's just say we can save this as test and we can download this and you see that this has been downloaded. Okay, and you can actually import this also. So what I'm going to do next, right, is to then go to one of the stuff that we did earlier on. So remember, okay, so I just do a bit of magic, okay. So remember in our previous three-tier web architecture, I would say data flow diagram that we had just now, right? So what I've done is that I have written, in a sense, a bit of more descriptive description of this system. And this system is actually a bit weird if you think about this, okay? This is a bit incomplete in the sense that I haven't really defined everything nicely, okay? But it just shows you the essentials of what's really going on, okay? So here, what I would like you guys to do as two exercises, right? One, I'd like some assistance to actually issue the JSON files that I gave for the simple web app. That's one. And two, for those of you who want to import it into Precogly to play with it, please do. So that is the first task that I have for you guys. The second task I have for you guys is this. Okay, so you can see that we have a very simple diagram. So I want you guys to tell me in the chat what can go wrong in this system, and you tell me where this can go wrong, and I will populate some of your um yeah I then you what was I saying? Yeah, you populate some of these threads, right? And then I will show you how I would input it into Precogly. Okay, so yes, I will drag and drop the JSON file into the chat. Okay, upload to Spotlight stage. Okay, here you go. Hey, this is actually the very first time I am dealing with Spotlight stage. I drag and drop something, but do people see it? I try again because I realize I don't see it. Yes, I am trying again. There we go. Okay. Okay, so you can do this, right? Yeah, so to import this, what you do, you click on open and then you will open the JSON file from Precogly. Okay. Why I want you to do this exercise is because I will show you what happens later on. Okay. So for example, here I can say, right, as I go on, okay, maybe I would say, okay, this pipes to SIEM for analysis, but there can be certain threat items. Okay, what are some of the threat items that I want to talk about? Okay, because NQTT is basically a push publisher subscriber model. So we can say a spoofing thread. A spoofing thread. So we can add a spoofing thread here. Spoofing thread one, description. It is possible to spoof a fake log analysis server to steal MQTT logs from the application. Okay, we can rate it a certain severity, right? We classify under a certain strike category, information disclosure. We recently identified this, so we give this as open. Okay, so you see there's a number one that pops up. Okay, so let's populate more threads. Okay, so we can say MQTT flood. It is possible for an attacker to flood the log analysis server due to a lack of, I would say, data, say lack of input validation. No, say due to a lack of input, I would say validation and rate limiting mechanism, which can cause denial of service. I'm just writing these right now just to show you some of the capabilities. So I would like the Discord chat to also participate with me by helping me out with populating more threads. Okay. So as I do this, let's do this together. Okay. So I can say, for example, if they okay, if data in the same trust boundary is not encrypted, any user instead just boundary inters and uh what do you call that? Okay. And can intercept traffic. So let's do this. We typically call this an information disclosure threat because this is confidentiality, right? But we can do more than this. What else can we do? Okay. Someone seems to be pinging me over the issue with Discord, so I will hopefully get this sorted with the file sharing. Is there somebody who succeeded in I would say in getting this to run on their own instance of Precogly? Just wanted to check in. Did anybody get this running? Hmm. Okay, maybe I give everybody maybe 2 more minutes and then we will go through some other features. Okay. All right. Thanks, Vincent. Thank you. Okay, anyway, I think we have enough material to look at to start showing you some features, right? Okay, so I guess the next thing, which is probably what you have been waiting for, is for me to click one particular button. So I just want the chat to tell me what button you want me to click. Then yeah, there is a magic button I haven't talked about yet, which is probably the button I should be clicking to demonstrate what else I can do with this. So can the chat tell me what I should be doing next? I have enumerated a bunch of threads. I have put them here. You can see they're open. So what should I do? So well, the next thing I should do naturally is to analyze them. So I will click on analysis. Okay. So here, um, you see that we have consolidated these, right? And basically, okay, we have this spoofing thread. Okay, you can still add more threads here in this view, whereby you have your components, right? And you're familiar, if you are a little bit more advanced with Stripe, you would know that this allows you to be able to see Stripe by element as well as Stripe by interaction. So Stripe by element are your elements here. Stripe by interaction are your interactions or your data flows, right? So you can populate these in extra threads here, no problem. And you can also come up with countermeasures, right? Why it's important to have a list of countermeasures is because they are security controls. Like for example, okay, I want to install a WAF. Okay, why install a WAF to rate limit and to provide input validation against MQTT against a flood of traffic. Okay, or or exploitation of vulnerable log analysis web application. So this is preventive, clearly, right? So you can add that. We can also add, say for example, I'm just going to write a very simple one, right? Like tell people to not be silly. Okay. Just say follow security procedure. Okay. I'm just going to write this just for the fun of it, right? And control type, oh, this is procedural. Okay, right? So on and so forth. So once you have populated some of these, right, you can actually report this, right? So you can download the threat model, right? So you can actually show this to various stakeholders. But of course, this is only the, I would say, the guest version, and the guest version is actually somewhat limited in function. The more, I would say, if you deploy a Docker version of this, right, there's actually much more features to it. So if you would like, I can try to dig up the Docker version of what I have. Let me see if I have it now. Cannot remember if it's actually running. So I'm just going to show you something, which is the Docker demo that I have. Okay, just to show you some of the other features it has. But of course, I try not to steal the thunder of the creator of OWASP Precogly, so I won't demo too much, right? Otherwise, he would have nothing to demo. Okay. So you can see that we have dashboards. You can have this. You can have a view of, whether we do a good enough job, some of the metrics that are important for like CISOs, etc., right? And then we identify various threats. So you need to, you may want to see these at a high level. You may want to enumerate what you saw just now as the screen that you are familiar with. Um, okay, so this is for a different diagram. You have risk analysis. You can have your own scoring of risk assessment, which is something important in my view, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to be able to show how serious this is. What I think is also quite interesting is that when I was discussing with Vikram on this topic, I was also mentioning to him that threat modeling was also quite helpful to help us scope a pen test. Why? Because if you use a threat modeling framework such as, for example, MITRE ATT&CK, so you use Strike, and then after that you use MITRE to enumerate threats, you can then make use of these threats that you have in MITRE to come up with test cases, okay, to then be able to, what do you call that? Assess if indeed what was picked up in the threat model was actually legitimate, whether the attacks could work, and if they worked, okay, why they worked, and if they didn't work, at what point were they stopped. So this is helpful from the perspective of a threat model influencing the value add you get in a pen test, right? Okay, and then of course you have reports, and basically in the local Docker version, as you can see, you can have different kinds of reports, which is different views, right? So for example, for the high level overview for the leadership, your C-suite, they are not really interested in the data flow diagram, but they're interested in knowing numbers. So numbers, right? So technical perspective, you can see, okay, here is the DFD of a ROS2 system, and this ROS2 data flow diagram was actually obtained from a ROS2 project. Okay, so ROS2 threat model was actually obtained from this particular project, which has since been decommissioned. But if you want to have a look at what this project is about, I will just paste it in the chat. Okay, so we have it there. Okay, and then of course it's a bit annoying, but you have to deal with the compliance guys. So if to deal with the compliance guys, you need to show people how what you do is linked to certain compliance frameworks, which these I will leave it to Vikram to share with you all that there is to Precogly. Okay, so today is a threat modeling workshop, so I will just go back to what I wanted to talk about. Okay. So I think with that, we did some of the exercises that we did just now, right? Okay, so next, are there more threat models? And actually there are, right? Why? Because one threat model does not rule them all. There are many different threat modeling methodologies that are written because they look at systems from different views, right? For example, pasta, you enumerate threats, but pasta is very, very particular about assigning risk items to actual risk owners. This is important because eventually, if you want something to be fixed, somebody has to be held responsible for it. Somebody has to be held accountable for it, right? So, in that regard, it would be very important to identify these stakeholders. Okay, so there's Lindun, which is basically one simple way to look at it is Strides and a log for privacy. Attack trees are useful to help you figure out, especially in an environment where there's a certain crown jewel, what it takes to get to the crown jewel. Okay, and then there are a few other methods. And hybrid threat modeling method, as you can see, is the last one. It's actually a combination of different threat modeling methods. So you can actually mix and match these where you believe that you can see complementary views. Okay, so I'll just quickly wrap things up since we are already past time. So final remarks. So today what we did really, we focused on the core tenets of threat modeling. We really spent most of our time talking about these two questions, right? But it's also important to take note that the other two questions are also quite important. But this is something that because I don't have enough time today, this is subject to say maybe a future session or something like that. So this is something you can bring up if you would like. Okay. Then you also record some definitions that we have, but in essence, really the threat modeling process is not that hard after all. Okay. So then, I would also like to mention that in all these classes, I always like to tell people that actually, just because I speak to you today doesn't mean that I was the only one who was behind this. I learned threat modeling from many teams of people, and threat modeling is also a subject that gets better the more you do. So there are also life experiences that come together with this, and of course, inspirations. Pity is only an hour. If not, I can tell you lots of different stories of some of the happenings that we have in the field. Like how in the threat modeling process, we discovered that a certain barcode reader that some team was running was actually running embedded Windows. That was one funny example we got. Another one was how the threat modeling team actually came together to actually help to do a quasi team bonding exercise with the team, because before that we realized that the different teams were not really talking to one another very well. Okay, and of course there are mentors that have helped me along this journey. So with that, I guess if you want to connect with me, you can find me very easily. So I think you don't need to scan the QR code. You can easily send me on this, and I would like to get some feedback. So actually, I think if you want to give me some feedback, this one you can scan the QR code. You let me know if it's valid. If not, you can also DM me what feedback you have for this class. And I guess thank you very much for your attention, and for all those of you who have stayed till the end. Really thank you. I know it's really in the evening for you guys. So yeah, I guess yeah, this marks the end of the class.